I never thought I'd become the kind of person who plans their own disappearance from a marriage. But here I was, sitting in my car outside our house at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, watching my husband's sedan in the driveway, knowing he should have been at work. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. I'd left the office early to surprise him, maybe take him to that new sushi place he'd been talking about. God, I was such an idiot. The thing about surprises is that sometimes you're the one who ends up shocked. I walked through our front door quietly, planning to sneak up behind him with a hug. The house smelled like coffee and his cologne, that expensive one I'd bought him for Christmas. I could hear his voice from the home office, probably on a conference call. I smiled, thinking how hard he worked. How lucky I was to have found someone so dedicated. Then I heard my name, not spoken with love or even neutral professionalism. No, Connor said my name, like it was something bitter on his tongue. Listen, this marriage is a fucking nightmare, he said, and my blood turned to ice. If it wasn't for her family's money, I'd have been gone years ago. But I'm playing the long game here. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he'd hear it through the door. This had to be some kind of joke, a prank. Maybe he was reading lines for someone's play or something. Connor and I had been together for 7 years, married for 4. We were trying for a baby. We had plans for a vacation home in Vermont. Audrey's sweet enough, I guess, he continued, and I could hear him pacing those familiar footsteps I'd found so comforting just minutes ago. But God, she's exhausting. Always wanting to talk about feelings and the future. I just need to stick it out another 2 years. Once I'm fully vested in her father's company and have enough saved, I'm out. She'll never see it coming. The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear. Connor laughed, actually laughed. The money wife. That's what you called her last time, right? It's perfect. She has no idea that's all she is to me. A means to an end. Her daddy's construction empire is my ticket to real wealth. 2 more years of playing devoted husband, and I'll have everything I need. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on our hardwood floors, the ones we'd picked out together last spring. We'd argued playfully about the color for weeks. He'd eventually agreed to my choice, saying my happiness was all that mattered to him. What a performance that must have been. I don't know how long I sat there on that floor, listening to my husband plan his escape from our marriage like some kind of prison break. 5 minutes? 20? Time seemed to move differently when your entire world was crumbling. He went through details how much he'd already moved to his private accounts, how he was building relationships with my father's business contacts for when he went solo, how he'd hired a lawyer to look into the best way to maximize his take in a divorce. The beautiful thing, he said, his voice full of pride, is that Audrey trusts me completely. Joint accounts, shared passwords, her name on everything, but she never checks. She's so focused on her little marketing job, playing career woman. She has no idea I've been documenting everything as marital assets, even though I'm squirreling it away. By the time I file, I'll have claims on half of everything, plus whatever I've already moved. I wanted to burst through that door. I wanted to scream and throw things and demand to know who the hell he thought he was, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the cold calculation in his voice. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first stirring of my own plan. I crawled, literally crawled back to the front door, opened it, and closed it again, loudly this time. "Honey, I'm home," I called out, my voice somehow steady despite the fact that my entire body was shaking. "Decided to surprise you and play hooky this afternoon." I heard him scramble, heard the quick goodbye on his phone. By the time he emerged from the office, he was all smiles and warmth. "Baby," he wrapped me in his arms, and I fought not to recoil. What a wonderful surprise. I was just finishing up a call. "How about that lunch date you mentioned last week?" I smiled up at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. "That sounds perfect. Let me just freshen up." In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. Audrey Chen Morrison, 32 years old, successful marketing director, daughter of Michael Chen, who built Chen Construction from nothing into a multi-million-dollar empire, wife of Connor Morrison, who apparently saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM with benefits. I splashed cold water on my face and made a decision. If Connor wanted to play games, fine, but he'd forgotten one crucial thing: I wasn't just some trust fund baby. I was my father's daughter, and Michael Chen didn't raise no fool. Over lunch, I watched him perform the role of loving husband. He held my hand across the table, asked about my day, laughed at my stories about my coworkers. He was good. Oscar-worthy, really. If I hadn't heard what I'd heard, I would have bought every second of it. "You seem tense," I said, squeezing his hand. "Everything okay at work?" "Oh, you know, just the usual stress. Davidson's been breathing down my neck about the quarterly reports." He squeezed back, his thumb stroking mine in that way that used to make me melt. "But being here with you makes everything better." Lie after lie after lie. That night, I lay beside him in our bed, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep. His arm was draped over me, possessive even in unconsciousness. Or maybe especially then when he didn't have to pretend to actually want me there. I stared at the ceiling, running through everything I knew, everything I thought I knew, and everything I needed to find out. The next morning, Connor left for work with his usual kiss on my forehead and a casual, "Love you, babe." I called in sick to work, told them I had a stomach bug. It wasn't entirely a lie. I'd been nauseous since yesterday afternoon, but instead of spending the day in bed, I began my investigation. I started with our financial accounts. Connor was right about one thing. I hadn't been checking them carefully. I trusted him to handle our investments since he worked in finance. That trust had been weaponized against me. As I went through months of statements, patterns emerged. Regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize, cash withdrawals that didn't match any purchases I remembered, investment accounts I hadn't known existed. In total, over the past 2 years, nearly $117,000 had been moved. Not enough to trigger major alarms, but enough to build himself a nice escape fund. The transfers were labeled things like investment planning and retirement allocation, generic enough that I'd never questioned them during my cursory glances at our monthly statements. I took screenshots of everything, emailed them to a new account I created just for this purpose. Then I dug deeper. His laptop was password protected, but I knew his patterns. Connor might be a financial shark, but he was lazy with personal security. His password was our anniversary date plus his college jersey number. Inside, I found folders within folders, hidden but not well enough. Spreadsheets calculating exactly how much he could expect from a divorce at different time intervals. Documents analyzing my father's company structure, noting which contracts and relationships he could potentially poach. There was a folder labeled Exit Strategy that made me want to vomit. It contained apartment listings in Seattle across the country from our life in Boston, job applications to firms there, using references from my father's business contacts, a draft LinkedIn announcement about exciting new beginnings dated 2 years in the future. But the most damning thing I found was a series of emails to someone identified only as J. The messages were careful, never explicitly stating the plan, but the meaning was clear. Patience is wearing thin, but the payoff will be worth it. She mentioned her father might promote me to VP next year, getting closer. Had to play devoted husband extra hard this week. She's been talking about kids again. Might have to go along with it to keep her happy until the timeline is complete. That last one was dated 3 days ago. 3 days ago, we'd had a romantic dinner where I'd brought up starting a family. He'd held my hands and told me he couldn't wait to be a father, that our children would be so loved. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking with rage. But beneath the rage was something else, a cold, calculating fury that surprised me. Connor thought he was the only one who could play a long game. He was about to learn otherwise. I went to work the next day like nothing had happened, smiled in meetings, laughed with colleagues, sent Connor his usual midday thinking of you text. He responded with a heart emoji. I wondered if he rolled his eyes when he sent it. That evening, I suggested we have dinner with my parents that weekend. Oh, I actually have that golf thing with the guys on Saturday, Connor said, not looking up from his phone. Sunday then? Mom's been asking when she'll see us. You know how she worries. I watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Sure, baby. Sunday sounds great. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own life. I installed a tracking app on his phone while he showered just to see where he really went during his golf games and client dinners. I started paying attention to how he acted versus what he said. The patterns became glaring once I knew to look for them. He'd tense up whenever I mentioned the future beyond 2 years. He'd redirect conversations about major purchases or investments. He was overly interested in my father's business dealings but tried to play it casual. And he was constantly on his phone, tilting it away from me, quick to close apps when I walked by. Saturday arrived, and Connor left for his golf game in his usual attire, but according to the tracker, he didn't go to the country club. He went to a coffee shop downtown, stayed for 2 hours, then went to a law office. His divorce lawyer, I presumed. I used that time to do something I'd been dreading. I called my best friend, Lisa. I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, I said when she answered. I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the financial discoveries, the emails. She was silent for a long moment after I finished. That fucking bastard, she finally said. Audrey, honey, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do? I'm going to bury him, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. But first, I'm going to let him bury himself. That night, Connor came home in a great mood, talking about his golf game, how he'd hit a birdie on the 9th hole. I smiled and listened, then mentioned casually, you know, Dad was talking about possibly scaling back the business, maybe even selling. He's getting older, thinking about retirement. Connor's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What? When did he say this? Oh, just in passing last week. I didn't think much of it. Why? No reason, just... That would be a big change, for everyone, including us. He tried to sound casual, but I could see the panic in his eyes. His timeline, his careful plan, all of it depended on my father's company being there for him to leverage, I suppose. But honestly, if he's ready to retire, I support him. Money isn't everything, right? I reached over and squeezed his hand. We have each other. That's what matters. He squeezed back, but his smile was forced. Of course, baby, of course. Sunday dinner with my parents was a masterclass in Connor's manipulation. He complimented my mother's cooking, asked my father about business, played the role of perfect son-in-law. But I watched my parents now with new eyes, seeing what I'd been blind to before. The way my mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when Connor talked. The way my father studied him during conversations, like he was perpetually evaluating. After dinner, while Connor helped my mother with dishes, another performance of domestic bliss, my father pulled me aside in his study. Everything okay, sweetheart? He asked, his eyes searching mine. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything. My father had built his empire by reading people, by knowing who to trust and who to cut loose. But I needed more evidence, needed to be strategic. Just work stress, I said. You know how it is. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. You know you can tell me anything, right? And if Connor... Dad, I interrupted gently. I'm fine, really. That night, Connor was particularly attentive. The threat to his plan had made him paranoid. He suggested we start trying for a baby immediately. "I've been thinking," he said, pulling me close in bed. "Your dad's not getting younger. Shouldn't we give him grandchildren while he can really enjoy them?" The calculation was so transparent it was almost insulting. A baby would lock him in tighter to the family, make a divorce messier, guarantee him more money. I pretended to consider it. "Maybe you're right," I said, "but let's wait until after the holidays. I want to enjoy the parties without morning sickness." He agreed, probably figuring a few more months wouldn't matter to his timeline, but those months mattered to mine. Over the next 2 weeks, I carefully planted seeds of doubt about the stability of my father's company. Nothing dramatic, just casual mentions of market downturns, competition, changing regulations. Each time, Connor would probe for more information, his mask slipping just a little to reveal the calculating man beneath. I also started changing small things, moved some of my grandmother's jewelry to a safety deposit box only I knew about, started a separate savings account at a different bank, documented every instance of Connor's lies, his real whereabouts versus his stated ones, his financial manipulations. One evening, I decided to test him. I came home crying fake tears, but he didn't know that. "What's wrong?" he asked. And for a moment, he almost seemed genuinely concerned. "I had a fight with Dad," I sobbed into his shoulder. "About the business. He wants me to take a bigger role, maybe even take over eventually. But I told him I'm not interested. I don't want that pressure. I just want a simple life with you." I felt him stiffen. "You told him you don't want to inherit the business? Why would I? We have everything we need. And honestly, all that money just complicates things. I've been thinking maybe we should simplify our lives, downsize, focus on what really matters." The look of barely concealed horror on his face was almost funny. "Baby, let's not make any rash decisions. Your father built that company for you, for your future. Our future, our kids' futures." "But you just said money isn't everything," I reminded him, echoing his words from days before. He scrambled for a response, and I watched him construct his lies in real time. It was fascinating, really, seeing the manipulation happen when you knew to look for it. 3 weeks after that overheard phone call, I had enough evidence to destroy Connor completely, but I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet. There was something almost addictive about watching him squirm, about being the one with all the power while he still thought he was in control. I'd started therapy secretly, of course. Dr. Martinez helped me process the rage and betrayal without losing myself to it. "What's your end goal, Audrey?" she asked during one session. "What does victory look like to you?" "I want him to know that I knew," I said. "I want him to realize that while he was playing me, I was playing him better, and I want him to leave with nothing. Not a penny of my family's money, not a single business contact, not even his reputation intact. And then I want to forget he ever existed." She nodded. "Revenge can be cathartic, but don't let it consume you. Don't become him in the process of destroying him." Her words stuck with me. I was walking a fine line between justice and cruelty. But every time I wavered, I remembered his laugh when he called me the money wife. That laugh kept me focused. One night, I decided to push things further. We were at a restaurant with another couple, his colleague David and David's wife, Sarah. After a few drinks, I started a conversation about relationships. "You know what I love about Connor?" I said, my voice slightly slurred to fake tipsiness. "He's never once asked me about my trust fund or tried to involve himself in my family's finances. It's so refreshing." "Sarah, you wouldn't believe how many guys I dated before who only saw dollar signs." Connor's hand tightened on his wineglass. "Audrey, honey?" "No, it's true," I continued. "Remember when we got married, and you insisted on keeping our finances separate at first? You said you wanted to prove you could support us on your own. So romantic." David raised an eyebrow. "Really? Connor, you never mentioned that. I thought you guys pooled everything from day one." Connor's laugh was strained. "Well, eventually we combined things." "Audrey's exaggerating." "Am I?" I turned to him with wide, innocent eyes. "I distinctly remember you saying you never wanted me to think you married me for money. That's why you were so weird about accepting help from Dad for the house down payment." Sarah sighed wistfully. "That's so sweet. Most guys would jump at that opportunity." Connor was sweating now. His carefully crafted image as the successful husband who'd married for love was clashing with the narrative I was creating. He couldn't correct me without looking like he had married me for money. It was delicious. "We should get going," Connor said abruptly. "Early morning tomorrow." In the car, he was silent for the first few minutes. "Then, what was that about?" "What was what about?" I asked innocently. "That whole performance at dinner, making me sound like some kind of, I don't know what you were trying to do." "Performance?" I turned to look at him. "I was bragging about my husband. Unless, wait, are you saying you did marry me for the money?" "Of course not." The denial came too quick, too forceful. "Then what's the problem?" He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "There's no problem, just maybe don't bring up finances in public. It's tacky." "Since when do you think talking about our relationship is tacky?" I pressed. "Unless there's something about our relationship you don't want people to know?" We drove the rest of the way in silence. That night, he stayed up late in his office. I could hear him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. Calling Jay, no doubt, panicking about his plan potentially unraveling. The next phase of my plan required help. I couldn't do this alone, and it was time to bring in reinforcements. I met my father for lunch at his office, a power move, since Connor would know about it but couldn't object without seeming suspicious. "Dad," I said once we were alone in his private conference room, "I need to tell you something about Connor." I laid out everything. The evidence, the recordings I'd managed to make, The financial documents? My father listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. How long have you known? He finally asked. 3 weeks. And you've been living with him, pretending everything is normal? I needed evidence. I needed to be smart about this. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd helped build. I never liked him, he admitted. Something about him always seemed off, but you loved him, and I wanted you to be happy. I know. What do you need from me? Your lawyer, and I need you to play along for a little while longer. Can you hint to Connor that you're considering making him a partner in the business? Nothing official, just enough to keep him on the hook. My father smiled then, a shark-like grin I recognized from his business dealings. Sweetheart, I taught you everything you know about negotiation, but I didn't teach you everything I know. Let me make some calls. That weekend, Connor was practically vibrating with excitement. My father had called him, asked him to golf, just the two of them. A business discussion, he'd said. Connor spent hours preparing, researching talking points, practicing his pitch in the mirror when he thought I wasn't watching. While he was gone, I met with my father's lawyer, Jennifer Walsh. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a reputation for absolutely destroying opponents in court. Divorce is easy, she said, reviewing my evidence. This level of financial fraud, however, could be criminal. Do you want to press charges? I want that option available, I said. But mostly, I want him gone, completely gone. No money, no connections, no way to ever come near me or my family again. Consider it done. Connor came home from golf floating on air. Your dad wants to discuss partnership terms, he practically shouted. Can you believe it? All these years of work are finally paying off. That's amazing, honey, I said, kissing his cheek. You deserve it. That night, he was more affectionate than he'd been in months, holding me, telling me about our future, the house we'd buy, the trips we'd take, all funded by the partnership he was about to swindle from my father, of course. But he didn't know that my father was playing him just like I was. The next day, I made my biggest move yet. I called Jay. Yes, I'd figured out who Jay was. Connor wasn't as clever as he thought. Jay was Jessica, his ex-girlfriend from college, the one who dumped him for someone wealthier, the one he'd never quite gotten over. She was recently divorced and living in Seattle, exactly where Connor planned to move. Hello? Her voice was cautious. Jessica, this is Audrey Morrison, Connor's wife. Silence. I know about your little arrangement, I continued. I have the emails, the phone records, everything. I'm calling to offer you a choice. You can continue with this plan and be named as a co-conspirator in fraud and alienation of affection charges. Or you can disappear from his life completely and permanently. I don't know what you're talking about. The email from last Tuesday where you discussed, and I quote, maintaining the status quo until the package is secured? That email? A long pause. Then, what do you want? I want you to ghost him, block his number, delete your emails, disappear. And if he reaches out, you don't respond. Ever. He'll wonder. Let him wonder. That's my price for not including you in the lawsuit. She agreed immediately. Turns out, she wasn't as invested in Connor as he was in her. She'd been enjoying the attention, the promise of future wealth, but she wasn't about to risk her own reputation for him. Connor's unraveling began slowly. Jessica stopped responding to his messages. The partnership meeting with my father kept getting postponed. Small things started going wrong at his job, deals falling through, clients pulling out. He didn't know that my father had made some strategic phone calls to old friends in the industry. I watched him grow increasingly paranoid and stressed. He'd check his phone obsessively, snap at small things, pace the house at night. The confident, calculating man I'd overheard was disappearing, replaced by someone desperate and frightened. Is everything okay? I asked one evening, finding him staring at his laptop in the dark. Fine, he said shortly. Just work stuff. You can talk to me, you know, we're a team. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something like suspicion in his eyes. But then he shook his head. I know, baby. I'm just stressed. The partnership thing with your dad, I really need it to work out. Why? I asked innocently. We're doing fine financially. It's not about the money, he lied. It's about respect, achievement, building something. But you have built something, with me, our life together. The words seemed to physically pain him. Right. Of course, that's what matters most. 2 days later, I played my ace. I came home with a pregnancy test. Not a real one. I'd been on birth control the entire time, secretly renewed and hidden. But he didn't know that. Connor, I said, tears in my eyes, real ones this time, tears of rage disguised as joy. I'm pregnant. The succession of emotions on his face was cinematic. Shock, calculation, panic, forced happiness. That's wonderful, baby. Is it? I asked. You seem upset. No, I'm thrilled, just surprised. We weren't really trying yet. Sometimes the best things are surprises, I said, watching him squirm. Over the next week, he tried 3 times to suggest that maybe we weren't ready for a baby. Each time, I cried and asked if he didn't want a family with me. Each time, he backtracked, trapped by his own performance of loving husband. Meanwhile, my father had Connor jumping through increasingly impossible hoops for the partnership. Financial audits, background checks, performance reviews. Connor submitted to all of it, growing more frantic as each requirement was added. It's like he's looking for a reason to say no, Connor complained one night. Dad's just thorough, I assured him. He wants to make sure everything's perfect. You know how he is about the business. But the background check would be his downfall. My father's investigators were very good, and they found things even I hadn't. A previous employer who'd suspected him of embezzlement but couldn't prove it. A pattern of relationships with wealthy women that ended when the money ran out. Debts he'd hidden even from me. The noose was tightening. All I had to do now was kick the chair. The confrontation came on a Thursday. I'd arranged everything perfectly. My parents would arrive at 6 p.m. for what Connor thought was a celebration dinner for the partnership. Jennifer Walsh would arrive at 6:30 with the divorce papers. The locks would be changed at 7. That morning, Connor was nervous but excited. "Tonight's the night," he said, straightening his tie. "Your father finally makes the announcement. I have a feeling tonight will be unforgettable." I agreed. He kissed me goodbye the last time he'd ever do that and left for work. I spent the day moving his things into boxes, labeled with cold efficiency. 7 years of a life together, reduced to cardboard and tape. At 5:30, I sent him a text. "Come straight home after work. Don't be late. Important family dinner." He responded immediately. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." No, I thought, you really wouldn't. My parents arrived first. My mother hugged me tightly. "Are you sure you're okay, sweetheart?" "I will be," I said. After tonight, my father was all business, reviewing the plan one more time. When Connor's car pulled into the driveway, we took our positions. He walked in with a bottle of champagne, his best suit, his game face on. "Michael, Grace, so good to see you both." "Connor," my father said coolly, "we need to talk." The smile flickered on Connor's face. "Of course. About the partnership? About your fraud, your embezzlement, your plan to divorce my daughter once you'd stolen enough from our family." The champagne bottle slipped from Connor's hands, shattering on the floor. The symbolism was almost too perfect. "I don't, Tufi, what are you talking about?" That's when I stood up. "We know everything, Connor. The money wife knows everything." The color drained from his face. "Audrey, June 15th, I interrupted. "You called me a fucking nightmare and said if it wasn't for my family's money, you'd have been gone years ago. Should I continue?" He sank into a chair, his mask finally, completely shattered. Jennifer Walsh arrived right on time, placing the divorce papers in front of him with surgical precision. "Mr. Morrison, I represent Mrs. Morrison in these divorce proceedings. You'll find the terms are quite generous, considering the alternative is criminal prosecution for fraud." "What terms?" he asked weakly. "You leave with what you came with: nothing. The house, the cars, the accounts, all of it stays with my client. You have no claim to any marital assets, as you've been systematically stealing from the marriage. The $117,000 you've hidden will be returned immediately, or we proceed with criminal charges." "This is insane. You can't prove." I pulled out my phone and played a recording, one of many I'd made over the past weeks. His voice filled the room. "Once I'm fully vested in her father's company and have enough saved, I'm out. She'll never see it coming." "We have dozens of these," Jennifer said calmly, "plus the financial records, the emails to Jessica." "Oh yes, we know about Jessica and testimony from multiple witnesses about your fraudulent behavior." Connor looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not the charming man I'd fallen in love with, not the monster I'd discovered, but something pathetic. A small, greedy person who'd gambled everything and lost. "The pregnancy?" he asked. "Fake, like everything about our marriage, apparently." He stood up, trying to salvage some dignity. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'll fight this." My father stood too, towering over him. "You could try, but my lawyers will bury you, and every employer in this city will know exactly who you are. Or you can sign the papers, leave quietly, and maybe salvage something of a future somewhere else." Connor signed. His hand shook, but he signed. As he was escorted out by building security, "Yes, I'd arranged that too." He turned back one last time. "Was any of it real? Did you ever love me?" "Did you?" I responded. He had no answer. Of course he didn't. The divorce was finalized in record time. Connor didn't contest anything he couldn't afford to, literally or figuratively. He left Boston within a month, his reputation in tatters. Last I heard, he was working at a small firm in Arizona, probably running the same con on some other unsuspecting woman. But I'd done my part. I'd warned his new employer about his history. What they did with that information was up to them. Jessica reached out once, a long email apologizing and trying to explain. I deleted it without reading past the first line. She wasn't worth my energy. The house felt different without Connor's presence, lighter, somehow. I redecorated everything. Painted the walls colors he'd hated. Bought art he would have called frivolous. I started playing my music loud again, something he'd always complained about. I laughed loudly, ate crackers in bed, left my shoes wherever I wanted. All the small freedoms I'd given up without realizing it. Dr. Martinez helped me process the aftermath. "How do you feel now that it's over?" she asked. "Free," I said immediately, but also angry that I wasted 7 years. Angry that I didn't see it sooner. "You saw it when you needed to," she reminded me, "and you handled it with remarkable strength." 6 months after the divorce, I was at a coffee shop when I overheard 2 women at the next table. "Did you hear about Connor Morrison?" one said. "Apparently, his wife found out he was only with her for her family's money." "No, really? They seemed so perfect together." "It was all an act. She discovered everything and took him for everything in the divorce. Complete reversal." I smiled into my latte. The money wife was dead. Long live just plain Audrey. My father and I grew closer through the whole ordeal. He admitted he'd had Connor investigated before the wedding, but hadn't found anything concrete enough to warn me about. "I should have trusted my instincts," he said. "We both should have," I replied, "but we know better now." A year later, I met someone new. David was different, genuinely successful in his own right, with no interest in my family's money. In fact, he didn't even know about it for the first 3 months we dated. When he found out, he was more intimidated than intrigued. "I don't care about your money," he said on our 6-month anniversary. "I care that you can destroy someone so thoroughly they flee the state. Remind me never to piss you off." We laughed about it, but there was truth there. Connor had taught me something valuable, not just about trust and betrayal, but about my own strength. I'd been tested, and I'd not only survived but conquered. Sometimes I wonder if Connor ever thinks about me, if he regrets his choices. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. He was a chapter in my story, not the whole book, and the best chapters were yet to come. The last time I saw him was completely by accident. 2 years after the divorce, I was in New York for a conference, and there he was in the hotel lobby. Older, grayer, wearing a suit that had seen better days. He saw me at the same moment me in my designer dress, confident and thriving. He started to approach, then stopped, something in my expression warning him off. I didn't smile, didn't acknowledge him beyond that single look. He was a stranger, less than that a ghost of a mistake I'd once made. He turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no sadness, just nothing. And that's when I knew I was truly free. My mother likes to tell people that the divorce was the best thing that ever happened to me. She's not wrong. It taught me to trust my instincts, to value myself, to never settle for someone who sees me as a means to an end, rather than the end itself. The company Connor had so desperately wanted to be part of, it's mine now. Dad's officially retiring next year, and I'm taking over as CEO. Turns out I had more of a head for business than anyone realized. Maybe because I'd been too busy playing the supportive wife to explore my own potential. I kept the house, but I've transformed it completely. The office where Connor made that fateful phone call is now my art studio. Yes, I paint now. Another thing he'd said was a waste of time. The bedroom we shared is now a guest room. I sleep in what was once his gym, converted into a master suite that's entirely mine. Lisa, my best friend who'd been there through it all, asked me once if I regret marrying him in the first place. No, I told her honestly, because if I hadn't married him, I wouldn't have become who I am now. He tried to break me down into something small and manageable. Instead, he forged me into something unbreakable. That's very philosophical of you, she laughed. That's therapy for you, I laughed back. The truth is, Connor did me a favor. He showed me what I'm capable of when pushed to the edge. He taught me that sometimes the person sharing your bed can be your biggest threat. But most importantly, he taught me that I don't need anyone else to be complete. I'm not someone's wife, daughter, or future mother first. I'm Audrey, and that's more than enough. I still have the recording of that phone call. Not because I need to remember the pain, but because I need to remember the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped being the victim in someone else's story and became the author of my own. Sometimes young women reach out to me, having heard my story through the grapevine. They're in relationships that feel wrong but can't put their finger on why. I tell them to trust their gut. I tell them that love shouldn't feel like a performance. I tell them that anyone who truly loves you would never, ever call you a nightmare behind your back. And if they find themselves in my position, I tell them to be smart, document everything, plan carefully, and when the time comes, don't hesitate, don't feel guilty. Don't second-guess yourself. Someone who could betray you that deeply doesn't deserve your mercy. Connor taught me that marriage could be a long con, but he didn't realize that two could play that game. And in the end, the money wife got everything not because of her family's wealth, but because she was smarter, stronger, and better at the game than he ever was. The last thing I did was donate $117,000, the exact amount he'd stolen, to a charity for women leaving abusive relationships. It felt like closing a circle, turning something ugly into something useful. The tax write-off was just a bonus. My story doesn't end with Connor's departure. It begins there. I traveled to places he'd said were too expensive. I took risks he'd said were too dangerous. I lived louder, bolder, more authentically than I ever had before. I became the person I was always meant to be, just had been too afraid to become while trying to be the perfect wife. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who recognizes the calculated coldness in their partner's touch, who suspects they're being used rather than loved, trust yourself. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting, and you're stronger than you know. The money wife is dead. She died the day I heard my husband's true feelings through a closed door. But from her ashes rose someone better, someone who knows her worth can't be measured in dollars and cents, someone who will never again accept being anyone's means to an end. My name is Audrey Chen, not Morrison, not the money wife, not anyone's meal ticket. Just Audrey. And that's more than enough.